You are listening to the Outside the Boards podcast. I'm Danny O'Leary. For most of my professional career, I have worked in mainstream sports for some of the world's leading sports organizations and properties and blue-chip brands, helping to create award-winning omni-channel marketing campaigns, result-driven sales strategies, and impactful brand-building initiatives. But all that work doesn't compare to the fun, excitement, and challenges I've been fortunate to experience working for the king of all sports, polo. For nearly a decade, I've put my heart and ambition into helping advance the sport of polo. I've made lifelong friendships, met some incredible people, traveled to memorable polo destinations, and heard the craziest stories. My goal is to share these people, places, and stories with you and provide a unique behind-the-scenes perspective of the game that breaks all the common stereotypes, all while discussing key issues affecting the sport today and the constructive sharing of ideas, insights, solutions, and best case studies for the purpose of advancing polo globally. Every week, I will have honest conversations with polo industry leaders, enthusiasts, and awe-inspiring people who make this sport great and fun to be around. I hope through their knowledge and their unique perspectives, they will motivate and inspire you. Together, we will explore ways you can make small tweaks to boost your polo business, whether you are a club, event, team, or player, that will amount to big changes in revenue, participation, attendance, and exposure. Saddle up. Welcome to Outside the Boards with me, Danny O'Leary. Danny O'Leary here, and welcome to Season 2 of the Outside the Boards podcast. On this episode of Outside the Boards, after 10 years at the helm, I'm thrilled to welcome Olly Hughes, the Deputy Chief of the Hurlingham Polo Association, the governing body for the sport of polo in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Way back in the mid-1980s, Olly was introduced to polo while at the Cotswold Pony Club. Although the opportunities to play were restricted to a few summer weeks of the Pony Club Polo season, Olly was well and truly bitten by the bug. After the culmination of a successful Pony Club career and a brief flirtation with higher education, he headed to South America to be immersed in polo. A career in polo developed from there, and having achieved a 3-goal handicap, he was lucky enough to work for the likes of Black Bears, Ellerston, and Bulldogs polo teams, and has also managed Ansty, Checkendon, and most recently, Beaufort Polo Clubs. Although the way he gained experience of working in the real world when he managed health clubs on behalf of 2 hotel chains, he joined the HPA office in 2012 and lives near Cirencester with his wife and 2 teenage children. Olly has done some incredible things for the sport in the UK in the last 10 years, most notably the creation of the Hurlingham Polo Association's own clothing line. Olly is a great friend, and I feel honored to have gotten to know him and more on this episode, and excited to watch him and the Hurlingham Polo Association do great things for the sport in the next decade. So let's get started, everyone. Enjoy! Olly Hughes, thank you so much for accepting my invitation and joining the Outside the Boards podcast. It's great to have you on. How are things across the Atlantic?
Thank you, Danny. It's really, really nice to be here. It's a great honor. How are things across the Atlantic? Sort of grey and dull and rather British.
It's not gray today, but it's cold and dull here in Chicago. Yeah. The mornings are usually better.
Yes. Well, we occasionally get the odd bright morning. The sun does come out from time to time. And no, it's been a mild winter, which is good for the horses. It's been a pretty dry winter, and we've literally only got about a month until the summer horses start coming into work.
And you're staying safe and healthy out there?
Yep, touch wood. Everybody stays safe and healthy. The arena season has been pretty busy, which is really good to see. I've been to a few of the HPA national finals and watched some really good polo, 15-goal, 12-goal. Some good polo going on there. We've got an international match coming up at the beginning of March, England against Ireland, the Inspired Arena Test match at Hickstead for the Brian Morrison Trophy, which every other year we play the Americans at. And it's all going well, thank you.
Good, man. I'm going to have to be partial to that Ireland match.
Yeah, well, it will be live streamed on, I think it's called Clip My Horse TV, I think is the one.
Okay, got it. That's a new one. I've not heard of that one. Is that what you normally use out there in the UK?
Well, the game is being played at the All England Polo Club Hickstead, which they have a very famous show jumping arena there. And so they are very well connected with all of this live streaming. And Clip My Horse TV If I've got the name right, I apologise if I haven't, but it has recently merged with FEI TV, which is the International Equestrian Federation.
Mm-hmm.
So I anticipate that it's got a pretty wide coverage.
Good deal. Good deal. I think Oakbrook Polo had the opportunity to play at Hickstead a few years ago when the Wales Polo team came over here. They had some type of like big concert in conjunction with polo matches out there. I forget what it was called though.
Quite possibly. I mean, John Bunn, who runs Hickstead, is certainly very forward-thinking and that sort of thing, and combines all sorts of off-field entertainments or off-arena entertainments with what goes on inside the arena.
So you got to bridge that gap, bring in new audiences.
And polo is about entertainment, in my view.
Well, Oliver, or Olly, you go by when you're not in trouble. So you are the deputy CEO of the Hurlingham Polo Association, which is an incredibly large role, and you've now been officially at the helm for 10 years now, a decade.
Yeah, 10 years. Absolutely.
Can you believe it?
10 years and 1 month now. Not that I'm counting. No, it's whizzed by. I mean, as you can imagine, polo is polo, and it becomes all-consuming in your life. Mm-hmm. But it really has whizzed by.
That's for sure.
Not without its challenges.
Now, before we dive into your success with Hurlingham, the highs and lows, and kind of looking back at the past decade, what is your story behind the sport? How did you get involved in polo? Were you born, bred, and fed the sport, or is this something you just fell into out of randomness?
Well, I grew up around horses. My mother was a very horsey person. She loved her hunting, fox hunting, that is. And I grew up riding ponies as a child and went through the Pony Club. And probably in my early teens, there was a group of boys in the Pony Club, and we were getting rather bored of the dressage, the show jumping. Cross country is fantastic, and I would do it every day of the week, but everything else required too much discipline for a teenage boy to stick. Mm-hmm. And a lady called Juliet Worsley introduced us to polo at her facility. She had been a player, and she had a stud at Marsden Manor. And she introduced us to polo, and it was all pretty much went from there. I played two of the boys that I started with that day, Jason Dixon, who is now one of the top professional umpires, and Paddy Cowley, who's sadly no longer with us, but went on to have a career as a professional player. We went on to play Pony Club Polo together until the age of about 20.
Okay. I was just going to say, what age were you when you had a mallet in your hand?
I would have been about 13 or 14.
13. Okay. All right. Got it.
There was no family history of polo, not recent family history anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I could dig somebody out from the ancestors. But no recent family history. But as you know, once you get hooked on polo, you get hooked, good and proper.
Yeah.
So we learnt polo together. We carried on polo together throughout our teens, and eventually got to the summit of Pony Club Polo, which was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Now, what handicap were you carrying at the age of 20?
I think probably only a 0 or a 1. Probably lofty heights of 0.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, trying to maintain and continue an education. And sadly, I became too addicted to polo, the drug that is polo. Mm-hmm. And I attended a university for a short time, and then took myself off to Brazil to the Vestes farm in the São Paulo state, and under the tutelage of Philip Elliott, who was an English 5-goal player, and went on from there. I'm not going to say I haven't looked back. I've looked back lots of times, but polo has been my life and career since then.
Now, São Paulo in Brazil, now that's a place that I don't think I've ever heard mentioned in regards to polo since I've been involved in this sport.
I mean, Brazil as a country is fantastic. The people are so lovely.
Did they have a good polo scene out there? Was it a good polo scene?
Yeah, no, very good. I was stationed out in the countryside, but we had Silvio Novaes just down the road, who was Brazilian 8 goals, I think he was. An incredibly strong hitter of the ball, could send it half the length of the field, and some very good young players coming up. It was great fun. And then in São Paulo, just outside São Paulo, there was a polo center, as I remember, in a town called Campinas, which is where they had some very serious polo being played there.
Mm-hmm. How much time did you spend out there then?
I spent in total in Brazil, I think I spent only 2.5 winters.
Okay.
But I say only, I mean, that's sort of 12 months, 15 months in total, probably.
And how old were you when you went out there?
Early 20s.
Okay. And then what did you do when you got back?
Came back to England from my first winter. I had bought at the end of the previous season at auction a couple of horses. And I came back, so I had 3 in total. And I came back and was playing sort of recreationally, trying to make ends meet in some way, shape or form, but not being paid for polo. Good Lord, no.
Yeah.
But having fun and learning a lot, realizing that maybe one of the horses that I bought at auction perhaps wasn't the wisest purchase, but we persevered. You've got to make do with what's put in front of you. The first summer I came back to England from Brazil, I groomed for a high goal team called Pendel, which patron of which was a chap called Peter Scott. And the players were Antonio Galvan, who is a Colombian, I think he was 6, Philip Elliott, and Eduardo Heggie, who was coming over, I think, for his first season in the UK. And I pretty much left my horses out in the field that summer and learnt an awful lot grooming for a high goal team, which stood me in good stead for the rest of my career.
So you're in your early 20s right now. You're grooming, you're what, a 0-1 goal polo player. Like, when did everything kind of just take off where you knew that you're in a way kind of making a career out of this?
Well, I, as I say, went off to Brazil again, came back the following summer with my own horses. And it was at that stage that somebody said to me, "You can charge a bit of money for this." And I kind of looked at them and said, "What, really?" And I think I probably went to 1 or 2 goals at that stage and got paid effectively diesel money, made a little bit more money from buying and selling a few horses, and carried on from there and went away again the following winter, came back and played several seasons from my parents' home in Gloucestershire. I was very lucky that I was able to base myself out of there, so I didn't have to rent a yard as such. They had stables there. So that reduced the overhead somewhat. And yeah, carried on playing, was lucky enough to get invited by Black Bears to play in their 8-goal team, which we had some success with. As part of Black Bears, you get to play with better players, and that's always the best way to improve your handicap. So that all helped. I then went away for another winter and came back and worked for Nick Williams, who had a yard in Gloucestershire, and based myself there with my horses there and played a lot of polo there. And at the end of that season, I was invited to go and trial for Ellerston for Kerry Packer's outfit in Argentina and Australia. Unfortunately, I didn't make the cut in Argentina, but they very generously still allowed me to travel to Australia. Whilst I was in Argentina, I was talking to the manager of Black Bears, their manager of Black Bears, who said to me, "Well, give me a call when you get back to England and you can come and work for us." And so that's what I did. Then I went and worked at Black Bears, having played for them in an 8-goal scenario a couple of years before. I then went and worked for them just outside Henley-on-Thames, and again learnt a lot around very good players, a big setup, management of horses, all of that, and played up to 15 goal with them at that stage.
Did any of your travels bring you to the US at all, or no?
As I say, I went to Oakbrook once, basically for a weekend, I think it was. I mean, it was a very short trip. It was when I was working for Nick Williams, and myself and Roddy Williams, who is Nick's son, went out there as half of an English team to play a few games at Oakbrook, which was great fun. When I was in the Pony Club, I went out as part of a Pony Club team to somewhere in Connecticut called the Oxridge Hunt Club. And we played a few games out there. We were out there for a week or 10 days, which was really good fun. Pony Club players, and just having a good laugh. Then went and played in Oakbrook. And other than that, I've been to Florida, but only recently with the HPA.
Yeah, and then instead of playing, now it's turning into business when you're coming over.
Exactly.
So what brought you to the HPA 10 years ago?
Well, I suppose my career sort of went on. I accumulated horses. I played professionally. I got up to 3 golds in handicap. I did realize fairly early on that I probably wasn't going to make it as a high handicap player. And even if I did, I considered that it was extremely difficult to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into club management, and my first club that I managed was one called Checkendon, which is up near Henley-on-Thames and is now called Binfield Heath. I was there for a short time, and I then, a couple of years after that, I went and ran a club down in Wiltshire called Ansty for the McCarthy family. Spencer McCarthy is still a very active patron in the UK and a good player. And I was there for 3 years. As is the way, I think you mentioned this when we were chatting beforehand, Danny, but polo never lets you go, because what happened to me is that I was invited to play for a chap who owned a chain of hotels.
Mm-hmm.
He asked me to play for him the following summer. I said, yeah, love to. We've made an agreement. And he said, what do you do in the winter? And I said, well, pretty much anything I can do to make ends meet, whether it's lorry driving or breaking horses or making horses, that sort of thing. Just something to keep the funds ticking over.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I tell you what, why don't you come work for me? We'll give you some training and you can work for me for the hotel company. So I ended up running health clubs, would you believe, and playing semi-professionally. I was very lucky because I had a salary and I had a fantastic hobby.
I bet you got a lot of business doing that. I mean, come on. I mean, my boss, Jim Jury, has a great quote. He says, you don't get into polo to be fit. You have to be fit to play polo. So
what I did get was a lot of experience of running
mm-hmm.
of business, bearing in mind I really only dealt with horses previously.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of experience of dealing with people, hotels, hospitality industry. You have to deal with some very nice people and some very challenging people.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to treat them all the same. So I think I got pretty good at that. And I actually worked for the company for 7 years, I think it was.
Okay.
So that went all very well. And then I had sold a horse to somebody who wanted me to play for them. And I agreed a deal with them. I went and played for them. And so I finished working for my previous boss at the hotel company
mm-hmm.
and went and worked for another hotel company. And this would have been about 2007, 2008, because we were about to have an almighty financial crash.
Mm-hmm.
And when the financial crash happened, I was made redundant by the hotel company. The day after, literally the day after I was made redundant, I had a phone call from my former boss, who I'd worked for 7 years, who said to me, how are you? We were having a chat, how are you? And he said specifically, how's your job going? I said, well, funny you should answer that, because I was made redundant yesterday. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, okay. He said, I was sat next to Claire Tomlinson, who you may know sadly recently died. So he was sat next to Claire Tomlinson the day before on a plane back from Argentina. And Claire said that she was looking for a new manager for the Beaufort Polo Club.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew Claire from my days playing at Cirencester. I rang her the following day. She was out on the hunting field at the time, which was part of the course for her, bless her. Anyway, she rang me back, and February 2009, I started work at the Beaufort Polo Club with Claire and had a fantastic 3 years there, very tough 3 years there, but really, really good, really rewarding. And then in late 2010, I saw an advertisement that the HPA were recruiting, and I thought, well, that is the next logical step in a career. If I had sat down and mapped out a career in polo, mm-hmm. in polo management, that was the next logical step. And I applied for the job, and I was lucky enough to get it, and started in January 2011 at the HPA.
Nice. When you started, were you as the deputy CEO immediately, or
yeah,
okay,
yeah, I was immediately as David Wood's deputy.
Wonderful. So 2011 then, and you've been there for 10 years.
2000? No. So sorry, 9, 10. Sorry, I was at the Beaufort 9, 10, and 11. So it was 2012 that I started at the HPA.
Mm-hmm. Now, in comparison to where the HPA is today, was it a much different organization when you started there?
Not massively. It's had plenty of challenges mm-hmm. throughout my time there. I think that one of the earlier challenges was unlike US Polo, who have their fantastic clothing brand, we have been quite reliant on sponsorship, and we've been very lucky in some of the amazing sponsors we've had at Cartier, Audi, CNBC, Frasers, and I could go on and on. But we have been, as a sport, reliant on sponsorship to fund things such as development of players.
Yeah.
And I think when I started at the HPA, Audi were the England team sponsor, and I think Cartier had just finished as the main sponsor of the International Day, the Coronation Cup. So there was challenges of finding new sponsors. Audi stepped up to the Coronation Cup day, to the International Day. Royal Salute were also a great sponsor. And then, due to a conflict within the sport, we lost Audi as the main sponsor for everything. But we were lucky enough to replace them with a company called Flannels. So that has been sort of a financial challenge for the HPA. The on-field challenges are pretty numerous.
Aren't they all wherever you go? I mean...
Absolutely they are. I mean, you start at handicaps, which for me is probably the root of all problems in polo, because unfortunately the system is so subjective. It's open to influence. I wouldn't say abuse, but certainly open to influence. The handicap committee and the chairman of the handicap committee has to be pretty firm with how they decide on handicaps. And you have to decide whether what somebody is saying is correct or is not correct. In the UK, we were part of the European Union until the infamous Brexit moment a few years ago. And as part of the European Union, it meant that any European citizen had the same work rights in the UK as a UK citizen. So therefore, any South American player or any international player who was able to claim a European passport had the same rights to work here as a UK player. Previously, we had been able to insist on a limited number of overseas sponsored players in a high goal team, but we were no longer able to do that. So that reduced the opportunities for our English players to play at the highest level. So that has been an ongoing challenge for polo in England for many years.
This podcast episode is presented by the Gay Polo League. The Gay Polo League is the only LGBTQ polo organization in the world that is dedicated to producing high-end LGBTQ polo events and experiences. Its mission is to inspire and empower those individuals who identify themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender via the promotion of and participation in the sport of polo. The GPL promotes the sport of polo to provide equality, pride, inclusion, and confidence for those individuals who face discrimination simply due to identifying themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or other non-traditional sexual or gender identities. GPL works to create an atmosphere that affirms and supports the understanding and acceptance of all individuals regardless of race, sex, or sexual identity, and works to promote goodwill and camaraderie in the community. Its ongoing goal is to raise money at GPL events to help LGBTQ organizations better serve their communities. Our battle cry is, the slightest difference makes all the difference. GPL is changing perceptions in the LGBT community, athletics, and society at large, one chucker at a time. In 2022, the GPL was awarded the Champion of Equity and Diversity in Sports, awarded by the Palm Beach County Sports Commission. We invite you to join us. For more information about the organization, its events, and how to donate, please visit www.gaypolo.com. So to recap real quick, so it's now difficult for English polo players to play more?
Since Brexit, theoretically, it should be, as I understand it, it should be easier for the HPA to ensure that English players have a space in a high goal team. And of course, high goal is where you get the most experience, you're playing with the better players, and you get the most exposure. And if you're looking for a career in polo, that's where you want to be seen. When we were part of the European Union, obviously those with European passports were treated equally and fairly in the UK as equivalent to having a United Kingdom passport. Since Brexit, that hasn't changed enormously yet, because there is a hangover period where citizens could claim a pre-settled status.
Mm-hmm.
But in due course, I think that may well change, but that's not for me to decide on.
So is the current situation then good or bad for UK polo?
I think UK polo as a whole is in a very good state. There's talk of 16 high goal teams for this year, which is a fantastic number. The word on the street, inverted commas, is that there's a lot of people looking to play polo. The biggest problem we have really in this country is the supply of grooms. You need a good groom. Whether you're a beginner, an amateur, a professional, you need a good groom because, the horses need attention. Now, in England, there is a shortage of experienced grooms. And since Brexit, it's a double-edged sword. Since Brexit, any European groom who may wish to work here cannot do so without a work visa.
Okay.
Now, we had a crisis in 2016 when the previously agreed criteria with the Home Office that allowed grooms into the country were changed very suddenly. And we had to negotiate with the Home Office a way around this. We are now in a much better place with the Home Office, and we have a very good relationship that I've helped to rebuild. But the main issue for polo in the UK is the supply of grooms. If you're playing polo at the highest level, and we define the highest level as 12 goals and above, then you can apply for a sponsor license as long as you are committing to playing a minimum amount of polo. You can apply for a sponsor license, which means that you can employ an Argentine groom for the summer season, and actually now do it for the winter season.
Well, that's good because, a lot of the high goal players and professionals, they bring their own grooms over. Yeah.
So that works really well for the high goal. But as I'm sure you're aware, whilst that's the glamour end of polo, the vast majority of polo is played below 12 goals.
Yes.
And at those levels, the supply of grooms is short. You can't apply to bring a groom over from Argentina if all you are playing is 8-goal polo and below.
Yeah.
So you have to find an English groom. It is not surprising that an English groom working a 6-month job, it doesn't appeal to everybody. As I say, it's a job for 6 months. It may be relatively well paid, pro rata, but most people prefer to have a 12-month job.
It's a sense of security.
Yeah.
During this whole entire process, did you find that you had to really educate the powers that be in terms of how your industry works and what their policy and guidelines that they're handing down is just, it doesn't work for your sport. This is how it works.
You're absolutely right. But they have an incredibly difficult job because obviously, they have to make a rule to cover most eventualities. And from our perspective, we need grooms to look after the horses for the welfare of the horses, et cetera, and for the welfare of the players. They cannot change a rule for us that may then have a knock-on effect somewhere else. Why is so-and-so allowed to bring an Argentine groom over, but a nurse can't come and work for the NHS, for instance?
Okay.
So those are the difficulties, but we've worked long and hard with colleagues at the Home Office to get it to a pretty good position, really, given where we were 5 years ago.
I feel like that was kind of a similar situation, just dealing with the COVID policies that were handed down by, in our case, the state or federal, trying to, they would come to us and they would set up guidelines and what have you, and then you'd have to interpret them somehow in terms of how it would relate to your sport.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, it's just like, guidelines are X, Y, and Z. You're positioning this as if I'm in the Chicago Bears and I'm in a 40,000 seat stadium. I'm not. I can, do X, Y, and Z with my sport and how it applied. And in 2020, the state of Illinois, we are like one of the only outdoor sports that summer that you could actually attend. And it's funny, when we approached the state of Illinois with our seating plans for spectators and social distancing and so on and so forth, we said, we've removed all of our, assigned seating and things like that, and we're just doing tailgates. And then the first thing they say is like, all right, well, people are tailgating. Where do then they go to watch the match? I'm like, the tailgate is actually where you watch the match from.
Yeah.
And it took literally like 2 or 3 phone calls with the state of Illinois to all of a sudden have an aha moment. Like, oh, okay.
Really?
All right. Your field is 9 acres. This is, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're letting drive-in movie theaters in phase 2 like work. It's just like, how can you not approve our sport? We're way safer environment.
Yeah, exactly. It's a massive area. I mean, you know, in England, the vast majority of polo has one man and his dog watching it. No disrespect to the vast majority of polo.
Did you guys have the same success with COVID in the UK, or you kind of also had to deal with very, very strict, not willing to conform or comply with?
It was very strict rules, but luckily we had the chairman and the hierarchy of the HPA had some very good contacts in government, and we have a thing called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Polo, which is made up of several members of Parliament, and with advice from them and from others, we were able to agree policies with the government that adhered to their criteria without overstepping any marks. We were one of the earliest sports to get restarted in 2020, but it was all behind closed doors.
Yeah. There's a silver lining to what happened with COVID and polo. I feel like we were able to maintain a huge lift. If not, I think it helped get more people involved in the sport because everyone was itching to get the hell out of their homes. And we were like the only group that was like offering something for people to do that didn't require a lot of people to do it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it. I mean, in the US, everything is kind of broken down by state. Yeah, the CDC and federal organizations pass things down, and then the states basically, you know, go off data points of they have in terms of hospitalization, and then conform and create their own policies, and then that's handed down to the local cities and so on and so forth, and they can do what they want to do in a way. So it's just a trickle down effect to some kind. But for the most part, I mean, we pushed really hard. We had to get involved in politics on a state level.
Yeah.
And no, it was a success. I can't say the same thing for other places. Some places were just far more strict and they just wouldn't conform. They just ignored.
Because you have a sort of a state by state. It's not that the federal government doesn't decide for everybody.
I mean, the CDC present guidelines, and then the states just ultimately have to determine how they want to interpret them and how they want to enforce them. And then the same thing goes within if you're the city of Chicago, well, they have their own mayor and they can enforce things the way they want to as well. Right. But for the most part, the state presented guidelines based on a variety of different industries. And we were submitting our plans before they even came out with outdoor sports venues. When they came out, we're like, well, this thinking that we're the Chicago Cubs or the Bears, like we're not a stadium, you know, we're an outdoor big recreational field, and you know, we don't need to have that stuff. And it took a while because, you know, we crossed over multiple different industries, but that was allowed. Like they would have restaurant guidelines, outdoor sports guidelines, outdoor recreational guidelines, and so on and so forth. In a one sentence, it's like, you know, you can cross over multiple guidelines if they apply to you. And that's what happened. Like we were using 4 different guidelines for different industries. And like, this is how it applies to us. So it all worked out at the end of the day. But, you know, I know Newport and others, you know, they also had to get involved in their state politics and contact their governors and local politicians to be like, look, we can make this work for our sport. We can do it. We were all successful as a result of it. So a lot to be said there. But wow, I mean, it sounds as though even comparable to the USPA, it sounds like you guys had to really get involved in politics, not just from the grooming in 2016, which I remember being a big deal when I heard about it here.
Yeah.
The professionals and polo players themselves, and obviously COVID. I mean, it's amazing that you guys literally have a committee within Parliament that is dedicated for advising polo.
Yeah. A lot of sports will have an all-party parliamentary group just to advise them on how government policy affects their sport.
Yeah.
But they obviously had to be active on our behalf during COVID. Thank God for that.
Going back to, you mentioned something, it sounds as though comparable to the USPA, which obviously generates millions of dollars in royalties from their clothing brand. You guys heavily rely on the commercialization of your sport to generate additional dollars, and I'm assuming on top of member dues, tournaments, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, you're successful in that area. So some of the matches that you had mentioned like the Coronation or even the Queen's Cup and things like that. Are those events that the Hurlingham Polo Association owns those commercial rights to and can move them around different clubs, or how does that work?
The Coronation Cup is both physically massive and metaphorically a massive match. It is an event that's owned by the HPA. It has historically been played at Guards. It was played at Cowdrey in the year when we had foot and mouth disease in the country, and was played at the Royal Berkshire for 2 seasons. It is now going back to Guards this year for 2022. And on the 23rd of July, we will be playing Uruguay, featuring Polon Sterling, and the level will be between 24 and 26 goals.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it's a fantastic draw to pull people in to watch polo. It used to be, back when Cartier sponsored it, it used to be a massive, massive day, 15 to 20,000 people. That was, back in those days, was when it was almost the only polo show in town. There weren't so many polo events that went on, and it had an awful lot of add-ons, nightclubs, etc., that brought in a lot of people. I'm not sure that it will get back up to that level. I'm not sure that it's desirable to get back up to that level, because it is a fantastic event. I mean, as you said earlier, polo is about affordable luxury, and that's what attracts sponsors to it, I think, in my view.
Is the Coronation like your apex event that the Hurlingham owns, or are there others within your portfolio as well?
The Westchester Cup,
yes,
which is co-owned by the HPA and the USPA, is, again, I mean, the pinnacle event in my mind. You know, the historical rivalry between the US and Great Britain, the historic matches, fantastic games played at Hurlingham, and I think Long Island, maybe, possibly even Oakbrook, I don't know. But the Westchester Cup is an amazing trophy. We last played for it in Florida in 2019 and went down very unluckily in the dying seconds. But we're hoping to challenge for it again and come to an agreement with the USPA over how we can play for it again. And those are the two real sort of jewels in the crown. We have other trophies, the Golden Jubilee Trophy, which is normally a lower level international, played at the Beaufort Polo Club, which will this year be played against Ireland on the 11th of June. The Silver Jubilee Trophy, which at the moment I don't think has a specific game attached to it, but we can certainly find one. We have in the trophy cabinet, we're very lucky, we have a miniature replica of the Coronation Cup, which was one of the original prizes when the Coronation Cup was first presented in 1911. They knew how to give prizes back then. It was a miniature gold version of the Coronation Cup. And that goes on tour and has been played for in Dubai and gets played for in various places.
I think we need to talk. I think we got to bring that back to for our 100th anniversary. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. And I'd had to go back in my research because I thought I found articles. Didn't Michael Butler and the Oakbrook Polo have something to do? I don't know if it was in the 60s or the 70s. Brought international polo back to the UK after like a 30, 40 or something like hiatus or something like that. Does that ring a bell? And I thought it was the Coronation Cup.
It does ring a bell. It does ring a bell because I think the first time that we played for the Coronation Cup may have been against America when it was reinstated in the, as you say, 50s.
Yeah. I got to look back, but I remember because we're doing a 100th anniversary podcast as well. And I don't remember if it was Ronnie Tong or either Joel Baker or Mike Daly, they mentioned something to that level. And I think we actually got it wrong. I think we mistakenly said the Westchester Cup when in fact it was the Coronation. So for anyone who's listening, I'm correcting that podcast of what that was discussed. It was the Coronation. It wasn't the Westchester Cup. But yeah, I think it was Michael Butler that put that team together and they came out. And I think there might have been pictures with the Queen then, presenting the trophy. You can see young Prince Philip and those in the background.
Certainly would have been the Queen presenting it. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I do remember that.
So if you're up for it, I'm happy to have a conversation about the lower level of that. If you want to bring that back to our 100th anniversary to celebrate.
We'd certainly be very interested in that. Those games between US and UK, US and Great Britain, how we describe ourselves, England, that don't necessarily have to be played for the Westchester Cup.
Yeah.
And no, we'd certainly be interested in that. I mean, we were talking sponsorship and these big events and things, and one of the routes we've taken to try to not be so reliant on sponsorship is to tap into our intellectual property and our history and create our own lifestyle brand.
Okay, that's a good segue, because one of my guests on this podcast was Fred Mannix. He's got an involvement in that.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
he certainly has. Yeah.
So obviously you've been there for 10 years. So you were at the helm when this whole entire thing came up and leveraging your IP to create your own clothing brand. How's that going?
It's going well. So as you say, I've been there for 10 years. You have got me onto my favorite topic now, Danny, because I view it very much as my baby.
One of my questions is what is your biggest accomplishment in the past 10 years? Would you consider this the big one? Is this your baby?
For me personally, yes, I think it is. It was back in, I think, 2014. I was invited to go shooting with some friends over in Norfolk, and we were chatting over dinner, and I was saying that I felt that my role at the HPA was and is very much focused on development of the young players. And anyway, over dinner, when I went shooting, I was expounding my thoughts about how I felt that I was sure we could generate a bit of income to help with the development of polo if we created a bit of a clothing line for the kids that they could tap into, and let's see how we go. Obviously, comparisons to the US Polo ASSN and to Ralph Lauren are inevitable, but those two have much longer histories in retail. But nobody has a longer history in the sport than the Hurlingham Polo Association. And from that dinner conversation, somebody called Simon Taylor took the idea and ran with it and found somebody called Simon Hawkins, who is extremely experienced in the world of licensing and IP, et cetera. And we went down the route of rebranding the HPA and beginning to protect our intellectual rights and going further back into the history of the HPA. So the brand is called Hurlingham Polo 1875 because 1875 is when the Polo Committee of the Hurlingham Club in London, which was then effectively the governing body, they drew up the first set of rules for polo. And from that, every other country subsequently used and adopted and then obviously changed for their own purposes, edited for their own purposes, the rules. Simon Hawkins came up with the whole redesign of the brand. He had people that he worked for. He was an ex-vice president of Reebok. And Fred is one of our global brand ambassadors. Fred and Nina Clarkin are our global brand ambassadors. The brand is going extremely well. I think it's got very, very strong heritage. It was in the blocks to really start motoring in early 2020. And then this little bug came and slowed everything down.
Yeah.
They've done incredibly well, I think, to keep going throughout COVID and throughout lockdown after lockdown after lockdown, and are now coming out the other side. The online presence is good. Online sales, I believe, going well. And overseas licenses and distributors are now reigniting their interest in it.
That's good. So it was a nice cash infusion into the organization?
Will be in due course. And I think if we can have a small percentage of the success of US polo, then it will be good for British polo, but also good for international polo, because we can then afford to go and challenge meaningfully for the Westchester Cup. And we also have, obviously, the HPA is not only the governing body for polo in the UK, but we have, I think it's about 37 countries that are affiliated to us. And it's nice to play against them. Pakistan are very keen to play an England team. As I say, we're playing Uruguay, we're playing Ireland, and we've got the FIP World Championships this year in Florida. Yeah, that's going to be exciting. That's for sure. We're also trying to get Ireland back. I know at Oakbrook, we're talking to how are you? Richard Tyrone.
Yeah, Niall Donnelly gave me his contact information. So we got to resurrect this family relationship, because I guess that's
definitely.
The Beresford family came over and played in the Irish Cup back in the day. So I'm hoping to make that happen. Guinness is already hot to trot on it, I think.
Right. Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So
fantastic.
It's Chicago. I mean, the Irish heritage in Chicago is extensive.
This April, the sporting world will be celebrating a momentous milestone as the Lexus International Gay Polo Tournament, presented by Douglas Elliman, returns for its 12th year from April 6th through the 10th. The International Gay Polo Tournament was founded in 2010, and the event has grown in popularity, creativity, and impact, with nearly 3,000 players, attendees, and merrymakers from around the world attending the event annually. The event was created to generate awareness and to move the needle forward for LGBTQ athletes and to ensure athletes not only have the same opportunities, but also have a safe place to learn, grow, and excel in their sport. Since its inception, the priority has remained to raise a significant amount of money in support of diversity and inclusion initiatives for other LGBTQ organizations. Since becoming a 501c3 organization, the GPL has donated over $30,000 to organizations such as Compass Youth Program and SAGE. This year's event will benefit One Pulse Foundation, an organization born after the tragic events that unfolded at Pulse nightclub, where 49 people lost their lives in 2016. One Pulse Foundation's mission is to create a sanctuary and build a national LGBTQ museum to honor the victims. This year's event will be marked with full slate of activities and will celebrate with fun, fashion, and of course, polo. The 5 days of festivities will come to a head in a majestic match only rivaled by the creative competitions from the tailgaters when the event returns to the International Polo Club Palm Beach in Wellington, Florida. To learn more about this year's event and to purchase tickets, please visit www.gaypolo.com. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you at this year's must-attend event.
Is the model similar to your IP and what you guys are doing to the US Polo ASSM brand? Do you guys have control over product quality and things like that, or is it just your IP for the most part?
No, we have control over all of that.
Okay.
It was very important from the word go. The stewards of the HPA, when they agreed to give it the green light, it was on the proviso that A, it stays very close to polo. It doesn't just drift off being another polo brand. It stayed very close to its heritage.
Yeah.
And well, actually, it was Simon Hawkins. He guided us through all of this. And he said, we need to do it this way because if this way, under a licensing model, we retain control over the quality. So any manufacturer has to sign up to minimum standards. And if anything is substandard, then we can take action against the licensee. So it maintains the quality. So wherever you go in the world, it should be the same quality. I think the US Polo is pretty good on that as well now.
Yeah, I don't know much to it. I do hear like, oh, if you go to Italy or something like that, the product is way better. It's more of a luxury apparel line than here, let's say maybe in the US, where you see US Polo ASSN at, factory outlet stores.
Right. We had dealings with Michael Prince and Shannon at ASSN, and I have to say they're great to deal with. It's very clear from talking to Michael that he is very focused on what is good for polo.
Yes, and you're right. Global licensing is far more involved in the sport than they were, in my opinion, like 10 years ago. Even when I was with the USPA, there's so much guys you got to get involved in this sport. We need to connect it and so on and so forth, or you're just going to be kind of another Ralph Lauren in some degree. You're attaching yourself with the name of polo, but are you really involved in polo? Yeah.
I think they are, though, aren't they? I mean,
they are. Oh my God! Shannon and Michael are doing a fantastic job.
We've had a couple of conversations over, the sponsoring in the UK, and we had a conversation about that, and we're, so open-minded and understanding our views on things. So at the end of the day, it's not just about how many dollars they can make; it's about supporting the game.
And going back to our conversation about commercialization and those topics, sponsorship has evolved with having those conversations with big companies like that, because you look back and you think, where would action sports like skateboard and so on and so forth, where would they have been without Mountain Dew? Mountain Dew was a catalyst for sports like that to where they've raised their profile. And it's the same thing with here. It's, global licensing and your brands and so on and so forth. Like, we'll help your business, but these are the needs of our business in order to excel at a sport. We need to invest in players within our countries and so on and so forth. We need to amplify these tournaments and spectators and so on and so forth. And it can all work together. It's a win-win overall. But I'm glad we touched on that.
Once Hurlingham Polo starts motoring, I think that it'll be great for the sport in the UK and in general. And then we are, we're not solely reliant on sponsors.
Yeah. It sounds as though we're getting away with this COVID thing. You mentioned the handicap thing as well, which I think universally is always maybe an issue just because of the fact that it's so subjective. Are there any other issues that currently is affecting the HPA that you're tasked with helping to resolve? Or are there just things that you just want to change within the sport?
For me, polo is not so much about sudden changes. It's very difficult to change anything dramatically in polo. Everything needs a chance to evolve over time. And when you do make any changes, it is always the unintended consequences that come and bite you. I think that, as I said, the handicap situation, if there was a better way of doing handicaps, or even an objective way of looking at some data that could back up somebody's opinion, I think that would be fantastic. I know that a friend of mine is working on something along those lines, and I'm sure that there are some very intelligent people who can work out algorithms, et cetera, that may be able to work out that if I've played you 5 times and I beat you 3 times, but you beat me by more goals twice, how that means we compare to each other handicap-wise. But that's going to involve everybody working together.
Yes.
And I think that, one of the things that we in England can be better at is the clubs all pulling together as one. I think we certainly improved on that during my time at the HPA. We are stronger as a sport if we're all together than if we're all pulling in separate directions.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's probably the same in America.
It very well is. I mean, that's why you have, like here in Chicago, we have the Chicago Polo Association, which in effect is a co-op of 8 polo clubs.
Right.
Each polo club has maybe 1 or 1.5 polo fields. So when there's a tournament, we all have to be going from club to club to club in order for it to work. So we all have to be within a network. Now there's one, and Elgin is looking to expand to 4 fields, which is great. But for the most part, that's how it works in order to sustain our ecosystem, which is all the way down to practice checkers, all the way up to 12 goal. And there's so much of it going on, even weather. It might rain on the south side of Chicago and affect 3 different clubs, but everyone in the north stays completely dry.
Right.
So at the last seconds, it's like, nope, we can't play at this field like we hope to, but you know what? We can play up here.
Yeah.
Happens all the time. It's just the craziness of Chicago weather and the lake effect.
I think in polo, we are dependent on people wanting to spend their disposable income with us. And to do that, it has to be enjoyable. And it's enjoyable, I think, if they can go out on a field and they can look at all the players and think, right, yeah, all the handicaps are fair. But it's also, I think, the key to the enjoyment is good umpiring. By good umpiring, I mean, it has to be consistent. You don't have to have a Julian Appleby, a Jason Dixon on the field all the time, but people have to take their job seriously and it has to be fair. And I think that if people go out on the field and it's umpired well and fairly and consistently, they enjoy their polo.
Yeah.
Nothing, as I'm sure you know, leads to more arguments than umpiring.
Yeah. That's for sure. It's sportsmanship at the end of the day, it's
absolutely. Yeah. And it's for the vast majority of people, it's their hobby.
Yeah.
For the top players, the minority, but the top players, yes, it's their living. But most people are going out there to have fun.
Yeah.
And yes, we all like to win.
You kind of mentioned something in kind of closing this podcast. And that is, from your perspective and, the time that you spent in this sport, someone who, let's say, is in their mid-30s or has a discretionary income to get involved, and you raised on it, a couple times. And a lot of it has to do with the social atmosphere of polo, which is far more unique than, in my opinion, other sports and the camaraderie and so on and so forth. But from your perspective, if you're talking to a mid-30s person who wants to get involved or looking for a hobby to do, what would you tell them to motivate them to get into this sport from both on the field and off the field?
It's a sport that can pull a whole family along with it. It doesn't have to be just one person likes it. There are numerous husband and wives playing with their children. So if that's important, then that is a good way of doing it. It's a great leveler if you're all starting at the same level. The guy who works in the corner shop can be just as good as the guy who's running the limited company.
Yeah.
They're both starting on the same day and they're both on the same level. And I mean, that is also the extraordinary thing about polo is that it'll take a fantastic businessman who will then get on a horse on the Saturday. He'll be running his company Monday to Friday, making his millions. And then on Saturday, he'll throw his complete trust into somebody who has just told him that this horse is great. And there you go, off you go.
Yeah.
But I'd say to a 30-year-old, 30-something, go to a good instructor. If you're in England, go to an HPA licensed instructor, go to a polo school, have a go, give it a go. There are numerous have a go opportunities. And Try very hard not to get addicted to it, because it can strip you of everything. But if you find out how not to get addicted, then maybe let me know and give it a go. It is a fantastic sport. It is such good fun. It's a social sport. It's a very intense experience. There is nothing like galloping on a horse and hitting a ball at 30 miles an hour.
Yeah. I still categorize polo in the adrenaline sports. In my opinion, the adrenaline junkie is perfect for this game. So if you're the guy who goes out and does heli skiing or anything like that, you're going to get your adrenaline fix in polo.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure.
Every time. I mean, when I get on a horse, it's just like, Jesus Christ, I needed that. It's a drug. I hate to say it.
Absolutely. But don't labor under the illusion that it's a sport without risk.
Yeah.
That's where it's really important that you go to a good instructor, a good coach who wants to make sure that you are completely safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Olly, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to chat. I mean, we could talk all day. I mean, there's so much variety of topics to chat about. I mean, as the deputy CEO, you've encountered everything from issues that are affecting the sport on the field, issues that are affecting off the field, marketing, the business side of things, the financial side of things, you name it. We could go spend all day. So I have a feeling there might be a future podcast for us in the coming seasons in the future. We'll probably have to narrow down the subject matter, if you will. But I really appreciate you taking the time. And I hope you're enjoying the winter. Hope you're taking the time to relax just a little bit, even despite, I know arena polo is big out there in the UK.
Arena polo, no, that's good.
So hope you're at least enjoying your time and spending it with family and staying safe and healthy. And hopefully we're gearing up to a great summer. Obviously, we'll probably see you here in the States with the FIP championships coming up.
Let's hope we get an England team.
Let's hopefully let's get an England team out there. And then you and I will touch base about a mini Coronation Cup.
Absolutely.
Around the 100th anniversary. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Great idea. I'll probably get shot for saying that, but here we go.
It's tentative, everyone, for the time being. Tentative. We're just exploring ideas right now. No commitments were made.
What you do in America, you're spitballing or something, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Excellent, Olly. Well, I appreciate it, man. And if I don't talk to you in the near future, have a wonderful spring and summer.
Thank you, Danny. That was great.
All right.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
That was a great episode. What is the one thing you learned from today's conversation? If this episode had an impact on you in some way, then I encourage you to visit and subscribe to our website at outsidetheboards.com for more episodes and interviews with incredible guests. Thanks for stopping by, my friends, and hope to see you on the polo field.